Oh no, I need to call the police. What could have been going through their minds? Earlier today, I was attacked by a woman, probably in her mid-30s, wearing a hat and dark sunglasses. That's the best description I can manage. Can you guess her age from that? I'm struggling to make sense of the whole thing, so I'll start from the beginning. Maybe writing it all down will help me piece it together. The shock of being assaulted out of nowhere, and in public no less, is unlike anything I've ever been through. I just can't comprehend it. Only a few hours ago, my life was picture perfect. I had everything. An amazing home, financial stability, a devoted husband who adored me. But my happiness as I left the office on Monday wasn't just about all of that. There was something much more personal lifting my spirits. My husband was out of town on business, and I had plans for the evening. Plans involving my lover, Ethan. He's a new presence in my life and has brought a thrill I didn't know I was missing. That's why I had a smile plastered across my face as I walked toward my car. But that smile vanished the moment I felt a hand on my shoulder. Thinking it might be Ethan, I turned, only to be met with a fist coming straight for my face. The attacker was a woman, her expression twisted in anger. Before I could react, I hit the ground, and she followed up with a kick to my back. She didn't say a word. I lay there, stunned, as she finally walked away. Terrified she might come back, I cried out for help. An ambulance took me to the hospital where they quickly examined me. Thankfully, it was still early in the evening and not too busy. Aside from a split lip and some bruising, I was relatively okay. The doctors warned me to watch for signs of a delayed concussion and sent me home with instructions to ice the bruises. The police came to take a statement, but all I could provide was a vague description. A slim blonde woman wearing a hat and dark sunglasses. I couldn't even be sure if her hair was natural or dyed. With so little to go on, I doubted they'd catch her. I asked for a ride back to my car, but they said it wasn't allowed. I tried to stay cheerful, but the pain in my lip made even a small smile impossible. When I tried calling Ethan for a ride, he didn't pick up, so I ended up taking a taxi home. My plans for the evening had taken a sharp turn. Instead of the excitement I'd anticipated, I was left with painkillers, some vodka, an ice pack, and the idea of a long bath before calling my husband. He's always been my rock, the one to make me laugh even when I'm down. I wouldn't have been surprised if he decided to drive 4 hours home the moment he heard what had happened. I'd barely been home for 30 minutes. The bath was drawn, and my martini glass chilled with ice, when I heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was the Chinese food I'd ordered, I went to answer it. The next thing I remember is waking up in a haze. My head throbbed as though it might split open, and my face felt sticky. When I touched my cheek, I found dried blood under my nails. My hands trembled as I gently felt my face, relief flooding through me when I realized my nose wasn't broken. But my cheek was a mess, bruised, swollen, and throbbing. Turning my head, I spotted blood spatters on the floor and felt a painful lump at the back of my skull. Despite everything, I forced myself to sit up. Disjointed images flashed in my mind, hallucinations, perhaps. I could picture a stocky woman with long, dark hair and thick eyebrows, her face partially hidden by a scarf. And then a wooden bat, at least I think it was, hurtling toward me. The next clear memory was of waking up again, this time on the couch. It was 5 a.m., and my entire body ached. Even the smallest movement made my head feel like it was being struck by a sledgehammer. As I shuffled into the kitchen, a sharp pain in my groin reminded me that my attacker had probably kicked me there too. After swallowing 2 painkillers, I faced the bathroom mirror. The reflection was a horrifying sight. A black eye, a broken cheekbone, and bruising that made my face unrecognizable. Who were these women? The one from earlier that day and now this one. What was going on? I couldn't think of a single person who'd want to hurt me, not even in my line of work as a real estate agent. I debated whether I needed another trip to the hospital. The doctors had advised me to monitor for concussion symptoms for 8 hours after the first attack. Now, with this second incident, it had been even longer. I also thought about contacting the police again but dismissed the idea. My attacker left no clues, and our front door wasn't visible from the street. One woman attacking me randomly was bizarre enough, but two felt unreal. Despite the early hour, I decided to call Ryan. He'd know what to do. Oh no, Ryan. What would he have thought when I didn't answer his calls last night? He always calls me without fail when he's away. Would he assume I was sneaking out behind his back? I've always prided myself on being meticulous in everything I do. The thought of a false lead giving me away felt almost comical, but also terrifying. Grabbing my mobile phone, I checked for missed calls from Ryan. Oddly, there were none. That was unusual. Picking up the home phone, I dialed to review my recent activity. The last unanswered call had been 3 days ago. What on earth? Ryan never went that long without calling when he was away. It was part of our routine, a comforting constant. I'd even used it as cover in the past, calling him at his hotel as a pretense for concern about cell phone radiation, before sneaking off to meet Ethan at a motel, or very rarely inviting him over to my home. That brought Ethan to mind. I had called him yesterday afternoon from my cell phone and hadn't yet deleted the call from my history. I never stored his number in my contacts. That would be reckless. Instead, I ensured there was no digital trace of him. My phone held secrets, photos no one should ever see. But it was the safest place to store them. They were hidden and secured with a combination of my fingerprint and a complex password, the kind of lock that Ryan believed was a professional necessity. Whenever Ryan needed to use my phone, I'd unlock it for him and keep it in sight, never letting him poke around. It was safer this way than risking the photos being saved elsewhere and accidentally discovered. I deleted the call to Ethan and left him a voicemail, noting that he hadn't picked up my earlier call either. It was strange that both Ethan and Ryan were unreachable. Despite the early hour, I decided to call Ryan. I desperately needed to hear his voice, to feel grounded. The call went straight to voicemail. Maybe he'd lost his charger and his phone had died. That had happened before. By now, the clock read well past 5 a.m., and I had a property showing scheduled later. There was no way I could show up looking like this. Digging into my makeup stash, I applied a heavy layer to cover the bruises, thankful for my arsenal of products. I should explain. My makeup obsession stems from years of feeling invisible. In high school, I was painfully average, one of those girls no one noticed while the popular, athletic types captured all the attention. I wasn't entirely overlooked, but I didn't put myself out there like some of the other plain Janes who flaunted themselves for popularity, mistaking attention for validation. By the time I finished school at 16, I'd never even had a real relationship. My parents, content with my mediocrity, were supportive but not ambitious for me. I spent my days attending evening courses to earn administrative qualifications and waiting tables part-time. I lost my virginity to a man I later realized was just a smooth-talking predator. Our encounter, quick and impersonal in his hotel room, ended with him casually asking me to leave the next morning. I told myself it was a learning experience and tried to move on, thinking I'd gotten better at spotting predators. But my next 2 relationships ended in equally disheartening ways. By 20, I'd resigned myself to a pattern of failed encounters until Ryan came along. Ryan was a year ahead of me in school and as unremarkable as I had been. Tall and lanky, he was the kind of guy who blended into the background. We reconnected when he brought clients to the restaurant where I worked. He struck up a conversation, and I learned he was ambitious, with a clear career plan and the drive to see it through. When he asked me on a date, I accepted. 2 weeks later, we slept together for the first time. It was awkward. Neither of us had much experience, but we were both willing to learn. Looking back, my life before I turned 21 was good. Ryan and I moved in together, and while we weren't the most glamorous couple, we didn't mind. He worked hard, and I enrolled in a real estate course that he generously paid for. When my 21st birthday came, Ryan celebrated his first big work bonus by spoiling me. He gave me a car, a voucher for a 2-day session with a beauty consultant, and a surprisingly large engagement ring. Overwhelmed with joy, I said yes, drove the car, and saved the voucher for later. Now, I wish I could go back in time and tear that voucher to shreds. Maybe then, I'd have a husband who answered his phone and a face without bruises. Ryan had reminded me about the voucher as I was planning our simple wedding, but I was too caught up in the details to use it right away. Eventually, I decided it would be a fun pre-wedding treat. That's how I ended up spending 2 days with Sophia, an elegant woman in her 30s who knew exactly how to project femininity. Our first stop was a high-end hair salon, where I underwent a dramatic makeover. I have to admit, I was nervous about how it would turn out, but Sophia seemed completely confident. The rest of the day was spent shopping. Sophia guided me through upscale boutiques, picking out clothes I never would have chosen for myself. That evening, she even used my phone to ask Ryan to increase the limit on my credit card. By the end of the day, I stood in front of a mirror, taking in my new hairstyle and wardrobe. I almost called Sophia to assure her she didn't need to worry. I was starting to believe she knew exactly what she was doing. The next morning, the transformation truly began to sink in. At the salon, I was pampered with a pedicure, manicure, facial, and even a luxurious scalp massage. That's when I met Liam. He had an exuberant personality, claiming he was more fun than a tree full of monkeys. And, if you believed him, had once been a stylist to the stars. Liam and Sophia spent 2 hours working on my face, adding the final touches to my look. They made small corrections here and there but wouldn't let me see the mirror until they were done. When I finally saw my reflection, I took an involuntary step back. The change was astounding. The once out-of-place hairstyle and clothes now perfectly framed a face I hardly recognized as my own. Sophia smiled triumphantly as I stared in disbelief. She insisted I listen to Liam's enthusiastic 2-hour lecture on how he had uncovered the natural masterpiece that was me. I thanked them both profusely, though I had no idea then just how life-changing this experience would be. When I got home, Ryan did a double take, clearly startled by the transformation, but he quickly recovered and said, "This just shows you the way I've always seen you." That night, our passion reached a whole new level. 3 days later, we were married. On our honeymoon, I began to notice a change in how others reacted to me. Handsome men who would have overlooked me before were suddenly competing to dance with me. I didn't mind indulging them when Ryan opted to sit out, admitting he wasn't a fan of dancing. Despite the attention, it didn't fully hit me that my life had shifted until our wedding photos arrived. Looking at the pictures, I saw someone stunning staring back at me. For the first time, I noticed that I stood slightly taller than Ryan in certain settings. It was a small detail, but it planted a feeling of discontent deep inside me, one that I still wrestle with to this day. Over the next 5 years, our lives evolved in different directions. Ryan built a successful business, steadily climbing toward millionaire status, while I leaned on my newfound beauty to excel in real estate. Though our achievements were worlds apart, I couldn't shake the feeling of superiority. Within 6 months of embracing my new identity, I had become popular, admired, and entitled, and then, inevitably, unfaithful. In my defense, resisting temptation was harder than I ever imagined. I had gone from believing my body was a 5 out of 10 to being pursued by men who were 9s. It took waking up beside the third man I had cheated with to realize they were no different from the predatory men I had once fallen for in my youth. From that point on, I became far more selective about who I let into my life. Now, staring at my bruised and scratched face, I layered concealer and foundation until the injuries were nearly invisible. I felt a pang of self-pity as I attempted to call Ryan again, only to be met with silence. Every 15 minutes I tried, but still no answer. An hour and a half later, satisfied that my makeup had sufficiently hidden the damage, I gave up on reaching him. Unable to shake the loneliness, I made myself a cup of coffee, hoping it would soothe my nerves. The silence was deafening. Making friends with other women had always been a challenge for me, and now, with Ryan unresponsive, I felt more isolated than ever. With an hour left before I needed to leave for work, I sent Ethan a quick text, asking him to call me when he could. To distract myself, I sifted through meaningless emails until it was time to head out. Grabbing my laptop bag and the luxury briefcase Ryan had gifted me last year, I walked to the detached garage. I loaded my things into the back seat, slamming the door shut. As I turned to get into the driver's seat, she appeared out of nowhere. I froze, my heart racing. She must have been hiding behind the garage wall or somewhere nearby. What happened next was a blur. I remember falling to the ground, her foot stomping on my hands as I instinctively raised them to protect my face. The blows rained down relentlessly before they abruptly stopped. Shaking, I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the house. My face burned with pain as I stumbled into the downstairs bathroom. Leaning against the sink, I looked into the mirror and gasped. 3 long scratches marred my left cheek, with 2 more on the right. My right arm and forearm throbbed, though, thankfully, nothing seemed broken. After catching my breath, I called the police again. Then I tried Ryan and Ethan, still no answer. I felt completely abandoned. Shortly after 9 a.m., the office called, upset that I had missed an appointment with a client. When I explained the situation, they reluctantly calmed down, but I could sense their frustration. The police, however, were less than helpful. With vague descriptions of my attackers and no witnesses, they seemed almost dismissive, as if I was wasting their time. They asked if I needed an ambulance, but I declined. What I really needed was for my husband to pick up the phone. Utterly bewildered, I shut the door after the police left and stumbled into the living room. My gaze landed on the photo of Ryan and me perched on the mantel. I glared at his smiling face, shouting, "Next time, you will take your phone charger, Ryan, even if I have to pack it myself." The idea of being attacked by one random woman was unsettling but not entirely unheard of. 2 attackers felt statistically improbable. But 3, that was almost unthinkable. It forced me to confront an uncomfortable question. Why did I suddenly seem to have so many enemies? Try as I might, I couldn't come up with a single plausible reason. Resigned to deal with the aftermath, I turned to the mirror. The scratches on my face couldn't be ignored, no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise. Removing the earlier layers of makeup with a cleansing pad, I winced at the tenderness beneath. I carefully applied disinfectant to the fresh scratches, hissing as the sharp stings spread across my skin. Whatever bacteria those nails carried, I wasn't taking any chances. The burning sensation made the process excruciating, as if I'd poured acid onto my face. My right arm, already sore and beginning to bruise, made the task even harder. By the time I was done, my face was red, blotchy, and raw. As I examined the rest of my injuries, I noticed distinct bruise patterns on my arms and forearms. My attacker must have been wearing heels. The impressions looked too sharp to be anything else. Desperate for comfort, I dialed Ryan again, praying he would pick up this time. No luck. Frustrated, I considered sending him an email, hoping it might catch his attention and bring him home faster. But my laptop was still in the car, sitting in the garage, a place I wasn't eager to revisit anytime soon. Shuffling awkwardly down the stairs, every step was a reminder of the bruises spreading across my back, legs, and hips. Reaching the front door, I froze, my hand on the lock. A knot of fear tightened in my chest as I debated whether to step outside. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered, channeling the motivational speakers from countless real estate seminars. "You've got this. It's probably just a case of mistaken identity." Reassuring as that thought was, it did little to erase the lingering unease. Peering through the back door, I scanned the path to the garage. The layout left plenty of blind spots, and the secluded backyard offered no line of sight to neighbors. It was unsettling to think how easily someone could be hiding. Suddenly, my phone rang. Relief flooded through me as I rushed to answer, hoping it was Ryan. My relief turned to disappointment. It wasn't him. It was my office, arranging a meeting with a client at a hotel in 30 minutes. I tried to explain my situation, but they weren't interested. Short-staffed and running lean, they made it clear that if I couldn't handle the job, someone else could. That left me with one immediate problem: how to get to my car safely. Then it hit me I could call a taxi. I dialed one immediately, giving explicit instructions for the driver to park in the middle of my driveway, where I could clearly see the car from the house. If someone was lurking near the garage or behind the hedges, the presence of a witness would deter them. While waiting, I worked on my appearance, doing what I could to cover the redness and swelling on my face. When the taxi honked 10 minutes later, I did one last visual check before darting to the car as quickly as my bruised body would allow. Only when we were a block away did I feel my shoulders relax. The driver, a woman, which initially worried me, seemed disinterested, asking only where I was headed before focusing on the road. 15 minutes into the ride, as we neared my destination, I realized with a sinking feeling that my house keys were still in my briefcase, locked in the back seat of my car. Ordering the taxi back would take at least 25 minutes, making me late for the meeting. If the client stood up a second time, they might demand my firing. Reluctantly, I decided to improvise. I'd show the client the exterior of the property and explain away the missing keys as a bureaucratic error. I knew I'd likely lose the sale, but hopefully, I'd avoid getting fired. Before stepping out of the taxi, I called Ryan again, my hope dwindling with every unanswered ring. The client arrived half an hour later by taxi, a tall, dark-haired woman in her early 30s. She was striking, though her eyes remained hidden behind dark sunglasses, and she carried a massive designer bag that seemed as impractical as it was trendy. She glanced at a piece of paper, then walked toward me, her irritation evident as I launched into my carefully rehearsed excuse about the key mix-up. To my relief, she agreed to a walkthrough of the property's exterior. As we strolled, I outlined every detail about the house, grateful for my ability to recall the specifics without needing the notes I'd left in the briefcase. Deep down, I had a quiet hope that this house might linger on the market just long enough for the price to drop into our range. It was a charming property in a vibrant neighborhood filled with young urban professionals, the perfect place for Ryan and me to settle down. We made our way to the backyard, where I highlighted a charming, detached art studio, a true gem of the property. I listed its features with practiced enthusiasm before heading over to the master bedroom window. Peeking through a small gap in the curtains, I admired the serene view, imagining how prospective buyers might fall in love with it. Then, behind me, I heard a strange sound, sharp and mechanical, almost like a click. The noise prickled at my instincts, making me turn around. That's when I saw her. The client was gripping a telescopic baton, one of those collapsible self-defense weapons frequently advertised in women's magazines. Her previously composed demeanor twisted into an expression of unrestrained fury. She hissed something under her breath, most likely a curse, before lunging at me. I barely had time to raise my arms before the baton swung toward my head. The blow landed squarely on my forearms with a sickening force, sending a wave of pain so intense it took my breath away. I heard it, a crack. The sound of a bone breaking was unmistakable. Judging by her reaction, the woman heard it too. For a brief moment, her rage seemed to waver. She froze, staring at me, her hands still gripping the weapon. My agonized cries must have pierced through her haze of anger, but it wasn't enough to stop her completely. Whatever residual anger remained drove her to lash out again, this time aiming at the side of my head. I managed to block part of the blow with my uninjured hand, but the force still sent me sprawling to the ground. When I regained consciousness, she was gone. The backyard was eerily silent, as though nothing had happened, except for the evidence she left behind. Near where she'd stood, a small slip of paper lay on the ground, likely dropped in her frenzy. With my good hand, I picked it up and froze. It was a photo. My photo. The image was unmistakable, one of my favorites, taken just a few months earlier. A selfie I'd snapped with my phone, capturing an intimate moment with John. It was taken in the dim confines of a dingy motel room, the kind we paid for in cash. The memory of that night came flooding back, our weeks of restrained longing culminating in an intense, unrestrained encounter. The photo was candid, perfectly framed by luck and raw desire. But how had this woman gotten her hands on it? The realization hit me like a second blow to the head. This must be John's wife. That explained her unbridled rage. I had never asked John about his wife, nor had he ever inquired about Ryan. It was an unspoken rule between us, a way to keep our affair compartmentalized and guilt-free. But now I was paying the price for my ignorance. Struggling to sit up, I cradled my broken arm, trying to think through the pain. Calling for help wasn't a question this time. I needed an ambulance. However, I couldn't risk involving the police. If word got out about this, Ryan would find out about the affair, and that would lead to a disaster I wasn't prepared to face. As the paramedics arrived, my mind churned with questions. How had she gotten the photo? I'd never shared it with anyone, not even John. Could my phone have been hacked? At the hospital, the same triage nurse from before gave me a look that was equal parts concern and suspicion. She pressed me about notifying the police, but I vehemently refused. I managed to convince her it was an accident, though her skeptical expression said she didn't believe me for a second. When she asked about my husband, I shook my head so vigorously that the motion made me dizzy. They set my arm in a cast and prescribed strong painkillers before sending me home in a taxi. The driver, a kind soul, waited until I had safely locked the door behind me before leaving. Ignoring the doctor's advice, I washed down a heavy dose of painkillers with an equally heavy pour of vodka. My head spun as I tried to concoct a plausible story for Ryan, leaving him a series of worried, disjointed voice messages. Calling him again proved fruitless, so I finally resolved to send him an email. Unfortunately, my laptop was still in the car, and after the day I'd had, there was no way I was venturing back into that garage at night. Then I remembered our old desktop computer, a relic from before we'd switched to laptops. Ryan still used it occasionally, so it might do the trick. I powered it on and poured myself another drink while it booted up. When I returned, the screen displayed a small spinning hourglass with the words sinking beneath it. Confused but too tired to care, I left it to finish while I awkwardly managed a bathroom trip. No easy feat with one arm in a sling. By the time I returned, the sinking was complete. The screen displayed something that made my stomach drop. It was worse than I could have imagined. Well, that explained everything. The mystery of those furious women and their brutal attacks finally made sense. Oddly enough, the clarity brought a strange sense of relief after the sheer chaos of the past 24 hours. What the old home computer revealed was more than enough to connect the dots. The screensaver displayed a damning slideshow, photos I had painstakingly hidden on my phone, now cycling across the monitor every 10 seconds. Some were innocent snapshots of houses and interior designs, but others were far from professional. Explicit images, private, graphic, and never meant to see the light of day, were being paraded in full view on a machine I barely remembered existed. Suddenly, everything clicked. Why Ryan hadn't called me during his trip. Why he ignored my calls. Why he might never call me again. The weight of the realization was crushing, and it wasn't long before I found myself retching over the toilet, pain radiating through my bruised face and battered body. After regaining some composure, I returned to the office to shut off the monitor, desperate to stop the mortifying slideshow. But before I could, a dreadful thought struck me. If those photos had synced to the old desktop, what about Ryan's laptop? His computer was far more modern, undoubtedly connected to our shared cloud storage. My stomach turned as I imagined him discovering the hundreds of trophy photos, intimate moments with various men, captured solely for my private satisfaction. The scenario played out in my mind with terrifying clarity. Ryan printing out the pictures, cross-referencing faces with client files at my office, aided by the secretary who had always been fond of him. From there, it wouldn't take much to track down their wives who had every reason to retaliate. And retaliate they did, leaving me with bruises, scratches, and a fractured sense of self. Panic surged as I dialed Ryan's number yet again, hoping against hope for a response. None came. Gritting my teeth, I made my way upstairs, ignoring the pain radiating from my injuries. I opened his wardrobe, hoping for some sign of normalcy, but the emptiness inside made my heart sink even further. Back at the computer, I forced myself to confront the slideshow once more, this time logging into our bank's online portal. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. The balance was a shadow of what it should have been. My shoulders slumped as the enormity of my actions weighed on me. My recklessness had cost me everything. For years, working in real estate had given me access to a steady stream of attractive, successful men. I had made my choices, indulging in temptation while convincing myself I was in control. At first, I'd been careful, no photos, no evidence, no complications. But over time, I grew complacent, lulled into a false sense of security by Ryan's unwavering trust. It had been a colossal error. I tried to rationalize my behavior, blaming my past. In school, I was never the popular girl, never the one people noticed. Now, I had become everything I'd once envied, and it seemed my way of maintaining that status was through my affairs. I wanted to be desired, admired, and envied. But at what cost? I had always believed my marriage could withstand a single affair if Ryan ever found out. I'd even crafted a contingency plan for that scenario. A carefully rehearsed confession where I'd admit to one slip-up, paint the lover as a master manipulator, and beg for forgiveness with tears in my eyes. I'd promise it would never happen again and ask Ryan to give me a chance to rebuild his trust. But my plan relied on a critical assumption, that Ryan would only uncover one affair. I never anticipated him stumbling upon the full scope of my indiscretions. An entire archive of lovers, all laid bare at once. Now I saw the truth. There was no coming back from this. Not with Ryan. Not with my life as I knew it. The person I had become, spoiled, self-centered, and entitled, was unrecognizable even to me. My arrogance had blinded me, leading me to believe I could have it all without consequence. I was wrong.